Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And today is the third day of January, year 25 Aquarius, and it is our Friday weekly roundup of stories. And we do have some interesting stories this week. But first, let me remind you that, as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room. Because I have no guest today, the chat room is on the screen, and we can all share it at the same time. I hope you're having a lovely day. I hope you've had a great New Year's week. And yes, that's where we're at. The first story that I have for today is not strictly speaking a story, but a circumstance. And that is that once again, Mars in Leo and Pluto in Aquarius are exactly opposite. And this is considered a very difficult astrological position. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It is a time of conflict, unexpected happenings, and so forth. So be aware that that is the case. And two of our stories reflect that. We've had our first two terrorist incidents in the U.S. for year 25 within the first 3 days, and more or less corresponding to this astrological aspect. And one of them, of course, was in New Orleans. And, I don't know that I need to say a lot about those things, except that they represent an ongoing problem in the world. And one of the things I think a lot of people, because of selective memory, don't realize that this is nothing new. It is something that had faded away for a while and come back, but it hasn't ever really faded away that far. When I was a child, terrorism was a big issue. I can remember, I grew up here in central Illinois. I grew up in Danville. I can remember my mother being worried about going to a major mall at one point in the early 70s for fear that there might be a bombing, because there had been a string of these. And things like public bombings and other terrorist incidents were happening a lot in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a lot of talk of imminent revolution. There was a lot of conflict going on. And then, for several years, we didn't have that so much. But we continued to have it around the world. And then later, we started to have that problem here in this country again, coming from other parts of the world. And because of our conflicts in other parts of the world, more as we have it now. And this is certainly a concerning thing. But again, it's not really new. And you look back in excess of 100 years ago, and you find numerous assassinations of prominent public figures and other terroristic types of acts. This was a big thing in the 19th century and the early 20th century. So it's not really something new, but we often think it is. And I have to say that to some extent, it's just an aspect of contemporary society that we probably have to assume is going to stick around. And, that's unfortunate. And we can expect to see it change some of its qualities as it goes forward, because, as I say, during my lifetime, that certainly has happened. Because when I was a child, the terrorist issues in the United States were homegrown. They were American revolutionaries who were doing things like bombing shopping malls and so forth. And of course, to some extent, that was real, and to some extent, it was exaggerated. but that's always going to be the case. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you, Steve. So those are our first two stories. The car ramming in New Orleans and the Tesla bombing at Trump Tower. Now, the third one is the death of former President Jimmy Carter. And that's the one I think I'm going to focus on most strongly today. And I started by talking about our two stories about terrorism, because, of course, these are intimately connected with the life of Jimmy Carter. And, because of my involvement in various 501c3s, I avoid partisan commentary as a general rule. That doesn't mean I can't talk about individual people or individual aspects from a moral or spiritual point of view. And in bringing up the death of President Carter, I'm not actually making, in my opinion, any sort of inherently partisan comment. I'm speaking about the man. And I think that Jimmy Carter is a person whose life is very relevant to the subjects I normally cover. Because what is it that I most commonly say? Do the next right thing. Do not be overcome by circumstances, but keep going forward, keep doing your work. And what actually best describes this man, if not those ideas? And if you're as old as I am, or older, you'll remember that when he was in office, Jimmy Carter was not considered a particularly great president. Some considered him a particularly bad president, although I don't know that is a fair assessment considering everything that he was dealing with, including the fallout from Watergate. But he was not, by many people, considered a particularly effective president. Many things were happening during his administration that were not good. The economy was certainly not in a particularly good place. And international politics fell to arguably an all-time low with the Iran hostage crisis. And many people felt that he did a bad job in handling that. We know today that there was a lot more going on than we knew then. But the relevance of this is that once he left office, taking with him a relatively bad reputation, he did not let that define the rest of his life. He went on and did the next best thing as he saw it. And that was plunging himself into charitable work and community building work and doing good things in the world. And over time, he came to be seen as probably the most elder statesman-like of our ex-presidents. He became very respected and very well thought of, more so by far as an ex-president than he had been as a sitting president. And I think this is something we can all learn from, something we can all apply in our own lives. And that is that, not everything we try to do is going to work out. Sometimes it's even going to go so badly that it may, for a time, give us a bad reputation. But that doesn't mean we stop doing what we consider the right things. It means we keep on going. I've talked about all the witch wars that we faced over so many years in this community, and we never once allowed them to stop us. I can think of projects I've been involved in that were less than successful. Never allowed that to stop me from going forward. We never allowed it to stop us from going forward. And when I look at Jimmy Carter, I see that same kind of energy. The idea that what we do now and in the future is what matters. And, in the past, there may be success, there may be failure, but it's what we are doing as we go forward that is most important. And by focusing on the many good works of his later life, By the time of his death, Jimmy Carter was very, very respected, very well thought of, and many people who had thought he was a bad president reassessed their point of view. And in fact, if you think about it, he ruled over an administration that was more at peace than any other during my lifetime. Um, and hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room. And Ed says it's hard, and yes, it is. Um, it's difficult. It's particularly difficult when it seems like everyone is set against you at certain times, and this is going to happen in everyone's life. But you can't let that get the better of you. You have to continue doing what you're doing. You have to continue doing that next right thing in order to continue to build a positive future. If you want to have a life that follows a similar trajectory to President Carter, you cannot let a momentary defeat overcome you. You have to keep on fighting. You have to keep on doing that next right thing, and people will see it. Sometimes it takes a while for people to see things, and it is never easy to continue working your way through life. Life is not easy, and that does not mean it's not worth the doing. And my message to you today is to remember that, yes, these things are worth the doing. And even if you find yourself, as Jimmy Carter must have felt when he lost his attempt at re-election, when you feel rejected and overwhelmed and defeated, you can't stop. You cannot stay in that position unless you, in fact, wish to stay in that position. You have to pick yourself back up. You have to keep going. And you have to find the next right thing to do. If only so you can live with yourself. And, we can look at many people through history who faced this kind of situation, where everything had kind of turned against them in a bad moment, and they had their choice of either sitting in that moment for the rest of their lives or pushing forward. And many of them were able to turn their lives around and go forward in success, despite that moment of failure. And the ones who weren't able to do that were mostly the ones who simply sat there, who accepted it, who accepted the world's negative judgment of them. And so I think part of what I would say to you, even if the world is judging you negatively, you need to keep a positive attitude toward yourself. And of course, if you're judging yourself negatively, then you need to address that. You need to ask yourself, why? Do you really feel that way? And if so, you change it. And you create a positive self and go forward. When we talk about things like being the change we want to see, this is part of that. We need to embody the things we want to see reflected in the world. And we need to expound on those things in the world. This is the best way that we have to affect the world. And the thing that we can do to most defeat whatever it is we wish to see is to allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by circumstances and stop. Now, that's not to say that sometimes you don't need to change direction. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you need to fine-tune what you're doing. Sometimes you need to totally change what you're doing. And I am a believer in that idea that when you have a project, for example, that proves to be unsuccessful, what this actually is a moment of education for how to better handle your next project. I don't necessarily worry about those things that I have thought about doing and found in the long run that I couldn't, I worry about what is the next good thing I can do. And what have I learned from the ones that were not successful? And I think that a lot of life is learning and applying these lessons so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, so that we learn from the problems that we have. And now, going back to my first comment of the day, the opposition of Mars and Pluto, some things are kind of ordained in life, certain things we just encounter. Um, we can't do anything about their being there. But again, what we can do is affect how we react to them. How we react to those things that simply are, how we react to those things we create, how we react to those things others create, that's in our hands. And the longer we live, hopefully, the better we get at learning how to best react to these things, how to create the things we wish to see develop from them. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't like the way such and such thing panned out. Um, and I must just be miserable about that forever. Or I don't like this thing that's happened. The sky is falling. There's nothing I can do. I don't believe that's ever the case, particularly for a magical person. And I reject that point of view. And much of this last year I spent talking about Project 2025. But the one thing that I hope you have not thought that I was saying is that the sky is falling and there's nothing we can do. I believe very much there are many things we can do to ensure a good future. I was speaking about them yesterday. I'll speak more about them in the future. Um, when I look at something like this astrological alignment, I recognize that the opposition of Mars and Pluto is a difficult alignment. What that means to me is to be careful of what I myself do and to make sure I'm taking practical and sound actions and not forgetting that that aspect is there and acting haphazardly. And maybe this is an aspect of old age. It is, of course, natural for younger people to perhaps be a bit more reactive because they don't have the experiences yet in this life to temper their reactions. But, we all, no matter how old we are, no matter how limited our experience is, can temper our reactions with some common sense and with thought about what we're going to do. And I think that knowing what we wish to manifest, knowing the world we wish to be in. Oh, and hello to Diane in the chat room. It's good to see you, Diane. Knowing what it is that we wish to manifest, knowing the world we want to see, and always bearing this in mind will help us in everything that we do to build that better world. Now, it's never going to be the case that we all agree on how to do that. But I do think to some extent, if we're all trying to build a better world, that we can't help but move in that direction. And there are also people sometimes who do not seem to be trying to build a better world. And, all we can do when we're facing that situation is temper what we do. Because we can never control other people's actions. You must never think you can control other people's actions. It's not really possible, but you can control your own. And by controlling your own, you can often control the situation, if not necessarily other people's actions. And hello to Fox Furwitch in the chat room. It's good to see you. A lot of this comes down to one of my favorite subjects, shadow work. One of the big things that messes people up in their lives is not having done their shadow work and not actually understanding what some of their motivations are. To remind you what shadow work is, our shadow is the part of ourselves, the spiritual part of ourselves that we are not conscious of, that we do not see. Hence it is in shadow. Parts of that come from past life experiences. Parts of it come from things in this life that we just are not conscious of. A lot of it has to do with belief systems that may not be in our conscious mind. A famous example of this is the person who wants to use magic to get the ideal job that they've wanted so badly. And they do all the magic and nothing happens. Because inside they have the belief that they cannot have that job. In order to make the magic work, they must first resolve that belief. They must first heal that part of their shadow. Because the one thing that you're not going to find easy to do magically is to overrule yourself. Magic is about working your will in the world, and that means you need to know what your will is. And sometimes we have crossed wires caused by our shadow, where we think we want something with our conscious mind, but underneath we really don't. When we see people in the world who seem to destroy everything they touch, it means that they have shadow work they have not done. When we see people who undertake what are clearly foolish actions, it probably means they have shadow work they have not done, which prevents them from accurately assessing what they're doing. Now, if you want to know how to do shadow work, I've done several shows about shadow work. I've done workshops on shadow work. And shadow work runs throughout the degree lessons that you can find in my books. Hello to Nikki in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nikki. In the very first chapter of First Degree, we have a ritual bath, which is shadow work, though it never uses that term. In fact, I don't believe we use the term shadow anywhere in First Degree. Well, we do use it in Chapter 8, but we don't really talk in depth about shadow work. We just have you do it. And the reason is that sometimes telling someone that you have them doing shadow work will activate their shadow and stop them from doing it because they're afraid of it. To simply tell them what to do and explain later, well, yes, you've been doing shadow work, can be more constructive. People sometimes have fear reactions to words. And as a rule, it's better not to use those words if you know they're likely to have a fear reaction to them, until you've had a chance at least to introduce them to it. One of the things I talk about very often is interfaith language for this same purpose. If you're talking to people of a different religion than your own, the more often you can use words that you share in common, the more clearly they're going to be able to understand what you're saying. And the more you use jargon that is only common in your religion, the less they're going to understand what they're hearing. The more accessible you can be, the better you're going to be understood. And this is true with things like magic. The more, the fewer internal walls that you create for yourself, the better this is all going to work. The more you can work with your shadow to deal with internal blockages, the better your magic will be. You'll always have shadow. Building shadow is part of life. But as you work through your shadow, you'll have less of it. And it will be easier to deal with for the most part. Maybe it's time to do another show on shadow work, because I think that as this year goes forward, there's probably going to be a lot of shadow work to do. I've made the statement that I feel the whole world is working on its shadow work at present, and that this is part of the things that we're seeing in the world as we move forward in the Aquarian age. And if you have read what I've written about the Aquarian age, then, like myself, you will expect the very first part to be working through what the last vestiges of the previous age, and hopefully removing those things that you don't wish to continue healing those things that need healing, resolving those things that need resolution. And the problem with this, which is the problem in everyday life as well, is when we resist healing these things, when we resist resolving them, they get more painful to deal with. It's like a wound. If it becomes infected and keeps going on, it will get much more sensitive, which is really, it's calling your attention to it to be dealt with. I feel like there are many issues before us at present, which are very painful, because society really must deal with them. Um, we'll see if society does. But we as individuals, we as a community can. That is in our choice. And I feel that we must make that choice for healing and resolution and constructive activity as we go forward. I was speaking yesterday about how easy it would be at this moment, and I see people trying to do it, to fall back into our negative pattern of witch wars. Silly personal fights often representing themselves as something larger, but really coming down to jealousy and personality conflicts, and wasting all of our energy in this nonsense, as we did through much of the 90s and early 2000s. I hope that our community is wiser than that now. But I do see some people trying to slip back into it, and I cannot too strongly urge you not to be moved in that direction. Keep your eyes on what you need to do, the next positive, constructive thing that you can do, which is not a witch war. And I hope that as a community we can rise to these challenges that we face and to the healing that we need to have, both within our community and in the world as a whole. The world will never be wholly healed, of course not, because the challenges of life are part of its purpose. But that doesn't mean we can't have healing. It's like the peace campaign, as I've often said. Many people objected to the peace campaign on the premise that you cannot have perfect peace. And I totally agree with that, but don't we want more? Just because it can't be perfect doesn't mean you don't work to have more of good things. It is not the nature of life in this world to be perfect, but it can be better. And to wallow in filth because you cannot be perfect is ridiculous. And with that, I'm going to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors. And here we go. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. And our next auction will probably be next week sometime. I'm sure we'll be announcing it next week. We have taken New Year's week off. And I want to say hello to Jade Rising in the chat room. Jade Rising gives us greetings from Chicagoland. And I don't think I'd realized Jade Rising came from Chicago. And, I lived there for many years. I had many adventures in Chicagoland. And, I rather miss many of the things of Chicago. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed the program today. I'll be back on Monday, and my message for today is keep doing that next right thing. Even in moments of defeat, don't let defeat conquer you. Look for the next way to find success in your life. Look for the next good thing you can do. Um, Look for the next positive thing you can do. Don't allow foolish things, um, interpersonal conflicts that don't actually bring anything positive to the table, witch wars and the like. Don't let those take your energy. Put your energy behind good, constructive actions, and you'll be happier. With that, let us close with our prayers, we always do. And again, thank you for joining me. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk we walk together. And we ask you to help us to always find the strength to go forward in positive ways. Help us to find the ability to build that better world we wish to see, to be the change we wish to be. Help us to overcome all obstacles and create those things that we are in this world to create, to do the work we have come to do, and to leave the world a better place for our being here. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and